She smiled when she asked for my ranch keys, like she'd already bought my land. I came back to Montana because I was tired. Tired of courtrooms, investigations, and watching good people lose everything to dishonest ones. I thought a quiet ranch and a locked gate were all I needed. Then an HOA president smiled, demanded my ranch keys, and sent her deputy brother to make sure I handed them over. They thought I was just another rancher they could pressure into selling. They had no idea who had spent 26 years building federal cases against people exactly like them. And what happened after that? Changed this valley forever. If you enjoy stories where ordinary people stand their ground with patience, evidence, and the law, not anger, take a second to subscribe. There are plenty more stories like this ahead, and I think you'll want to see what happens next. Nobody plans to retire by counting fence posts instead of case files. I certainly hadn't. 3 months before I came back to Montana, I was still wearing a suit every morning, walking through the federal courthouse in Helena with a badge in my pocket and 26 years of investigations behind me. Public corruption had been my specialty. County commissioners taking kickbacks, deputies selling favors, developers bribing officials. I always believed people eventually made mistakes if you stayed patient long enough. Then my wife, Laura, died. Cancer doesn't care how many criminals you've caught or how many people you've protected. It takes what it wants and leaves you standing in a hospital room wondering what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life. When the funeral was over, I handed in my retirement papers, packed everything that mattered into my pickup, and drove west to the only place that had ever felt untouched by politics or greed. My grandfather's ranch. 780 acres stretched across the Bitterroot Valley like it had been waiting for me all along. Pine-covered ridges wrapped around open pasture. A narrow creek cut through the eastern meadow before disappearing into cottonwoods older than the state itself. The main house wasn't fancy, but every board had history. The front porch still creaked in the exact same place it had when I was 12 years old. Silence lived there. Not empty silence. Honest silence. The kind broken only by cattle moving through grass, wind brushing across barbed wire, or the distant call of a hawk circling over the valley. That was exactly what I wanted. No investigations, no courtrooms, no politicians, just fences that needed mending, 80 head of Black Angus to look after, and mornings that began with coffee instead of subpoenas. For 8 days, I believed I'd found it. On the 9th morning, I was replacing a hinge on my north pasture gate when I heard tires crunching slowly up my gravel road. Not a ranch truck. Too quiet. Too expensive. A pearl-white Range Rover stopped 20 feet from the gate. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out with the kind of confidence money usually mistakes for authority. She was probably in her mid-40s. Blonde hair pulled neatly behind one shoulder, cream-colored blazer despite the ranch dust, designer sunglasses, shoes that looked completely out of place on gravel yet somehow never slipped. She smiled before she even reached me. "Jack Mercer?" I nodded. "You've got me." She extended a hand. "Vanessa Brooks. Welcome to the neighborhood." Her handshake was firm, professional, the sort that made people trust you before they'd ask themselves why. "I've heard a lot about this ranch," she continued, looking beyond me toward the rolling pasture. "Beautiful property. It belonged to my family long before it belonged to me." "I'm sure it did." Her smile never changed. "I'm president of Silver Creek Ridge HOA. I glanced south. Beyond the tree line, I could barely make out rows of new rooftops where an old wheat farm used to be. They were close enough to see from my ridge, but more than a mile from my property line. "I've seen the entrance sign," I said. "It's a wonderful community. I'm sure your residents enjoy it." "They do." A brief silence settled between us. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "I'll need a permanent key to your front ranch gate." She said it casually, not as a request, as though she'd just reminded me to put the trash out on Tuesday. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. I'm sorry? The HOA maintains emergency preparedness plans, fire evacuation, medical response, search and rescue. She gestured toward my entrance. Your access road connects to county land beyond your ranch. Having a key would make future emergency coordination much easier. I rested one hand on the gate. This ranch has had one owner since 1978. That's wonderful. It isn't part of Silver Creek Ridge. I know. It never has been. I understand. And nobody enters without my permission. For the first time, something shifted behind her smile. Not anger, calculation. The warmth remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. Mr. Mercer, she said softly. Every landowner around here eventually realizes cooperation benefits everyone. I've always found permission works better than expectation. She laughed politely, as if I'd made a charming joke. I admire people who protect what's theirs. So do I. Another pause. She glanced once toward the chain securing my gate before looking back at me. I hope this doesn't become unnecessarily difficult. I don't. She adjusted her sunglasses. Well, the smile returned in full. Everyone cooperates eventually. Then she turned, climbed back into her SUV, and drove away without another word. I watched the dust settle over the gravel road long after the vehicle disappeared. Something about the conversation refused to leave me alone. It wasn't the request. It was the assumption. She hadn't come to ask for access. She'd come expecting to receive it. I looked through the steel bars of the ranch gate toward the empty county road stretching into the valley. After 26 years investigating corruption, I'd learned one lesson that never failed. People rarely ask for something they don't already believe belongs to them. The question wasn't why Vanessa Brooks wanted my gate key. The question was why she thought she had any right to ask in the first place. 3 days later, the first answer arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was certified, stamped with the polished silver crest of Silver Creek Ridge HOA. Whoever designed it understood psychology. Heavy paper, formal lettering. The kind of presentation meant to make ordinary people nervous before they even broke the seal. Inside was a violation notice. According to the HOA, my cattle generated excessive odor too close to residential property. My perimeter fence exceeded approved community standards. My gravel road created unacceptable dust conditions. The letter concluded by requesting corrective action within 10 business days to avoid further enforcement. I read it twice. Then I checked the deed hanging in my office. My ranch had been recorded in Ravalli County nearly 4 decades before Silver Creek Ridge existed. Their covenants ended exactly where my property line began. The notice had no legal authority, but it wasn't written for someone who understood property law. It was written for someone who didn't. I placed it inside a new manila folder. Across the tab, I wrote one word: Brooks. The second letter arrived 2 days later. This time, my beehives allegedly violated neighborhood environmental standards. The third claimed my ranch truck qualified as commercial equipment incompatible with nearby residential aesthetics. By the end of the week, there were 5 notices. Different complaints. Same elegant letterhead. Same implied authority. None of them cited an actual county ordinance. Everyone referenced HOA policies that had absolutely nothing to do with my land. I didn't call Vanessa. People trying to manufacture authority often reveal far more when nobody interrupts them. Instead, I documented everything. Each envelope, each postmark, each signature, each deadline. Old habits die hard. The following Monday, a white county pickup rolled through my front gate. A code enforcement inspector stepped out carrying a clipboard. He introduced himself as Bill Harmon. Sorry to bother you, Mr. Mercer. What brings you out? We received another complaint. He looked almost embarrassed saying it. For 45 minutes, we walked the ranch. He inspected livestock pens, measured setbacks, checked drainage around the barn, photographed the fence line. When we finished, he closed his clipboard. I don't have anything. I didn't expect you would. He gave a tired smile. I've been assigned to this road 4 times in the last 6 months. 4? He nodded. Different property owners before you. What happened to them? He hesitated. They sold. The answer landed heavier than I expected. Before climbing back into his truck, Bill lowered his voice. Off the record, the complaints always come from the same person. He didn't have to say her name. I appreciate your honesty, I said. He tipped his cap and drove away. That afternoon, I crossed the fence line to visit my nearest neighbor, Sam Holloway. His ranch bordered mine to the west, and judging by the weathered look of his corrals, he'd spent his entire life working cattle. When I mentioned Vanessa Brooks, he stared into his coffee for several seconds. She asked for your gate key? I looked up. How'd you know that? Because she asked me for mine 6 years ago. And? I said no. What happened? He let out a humorless laugh. Same thing that's happening to you. Sam counted on his fingers. Violation letters. He raised another finger. County complaints. Another. Deputy visits. Then another. Developers offering cash. He leaned back in his chair. 3 ranches around here folded. They all sold? They all got tired. That sentence bothered me more than if he'd said they lost. People don't always surrender because they're wrong. Sometimes they simply run out of energy. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Bill and Sam had both confirmed. This wasn't random. It wasn't personal. It was a process. That evening, I spread every document across my kitchen table. Violation notices, inspection reports, certified mail receipts, dates, names, times. One by one, I organized them into chronological order. The stack wasn't very thick yet, but it already showed something important. Someone wanted an official-looking paper trail. Not because I'd broken any rules, because they intended to make it appear that I had. I closed the folder and slid it into my desk drawer. If Vanessa Brooks believed paperwork could force me off my land, she had just started a contest with a man who'd spent 26 years proving that paper trails almost always expose the people who create them. The paperwork stopped for exactly 48 hours. Then the badge showed up. I was repairing a water trough near the north pasture when I heard tires crunching across the gravel road. A Ravalli County Sheriff's Patrol SUV rolled to a stop outside my locked gate, its engine idling while the driver's door opened. A tall deputy stepped out, broad shoulders, aviator sunglasses, freshly pressed uniform. He didn't introduce himself immediately. Instead, he slowly looked across the ranch, studying the fences, the barn, the cattle grazing beyond the creek. Only then did he walk to the gate. Jack Mercer? That's me. He held up a small notepad. Deputy Ethan Brooks. The last name didn't surprise me. I've had several complaints regarding this property. I imagine you have. His jaw tightened slightly. We've received reports about unsafe fencing, livestock too close to residential property, and possible obstruction of emergency access. I rested one hand on the chain securing the gate. My fence passed county inspection 4 days ago. I'm conducting my own assessment. Do you have the warrant? No. Then you're welcome to assess it from where you're standing. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Instead of arguing, Ethan pulled out his phone and began taking photographs. The gate, the hinges, the lock, my truck parked beside the barn, even my livestock grazing several hundred yards away. What exactly are you documenting? I asked. County business. What county statute authorizes this inspection? He slipped the phone back into his pocket. You ask a lot of legal questions. I spent enough years around investigations to know they're usually worth asking. That earned me my first real look. Not curiosity, calculation. He hadn't expected resistance that sounded informed. I'd hate to see emergency responders delayed because of this gate. If firefighters ever need inside, I replied. They'll have my cooperation before they ask. He nodded once. People who cooperate early usually avoid unnecessary problems. The sentence sounded strangely familiar. Vanessa had used almost the exact same wording. He turned and walked back toward his patrol vehicle. Halfway there, he stopped. Without looking back, he said, "My sister tells me you're stubborn. And your sister talks about me more than she should." He climbed into the SUV and drove away. The dust hadn't settled before I wrote everything down. Time of arrival, time of departure, questions asked, statements made. Old investigators don't trust memory when paper works better. The next morning, another county vehicle appeared. Different department, different employee, same complaint. This inspector checked drainage around my equipment shed before apologizing for wasting both our time. As he packed up, I asked the same question I'd asked Bill Harmon. "Who keeps filing these?" He hesitated. "I'm not supposed to discuss complainants." "I understand." He glanced toward the county road. "Let's just say your address comes up a lot." By the end of that week, Ethan Brooks returned twice. The first visit lasted 7 minutes, the second nearly 20. Both times he photographed something different. Fence corners, hay storage, fuel tanks, water crossings. Each visit ended exactly the same way. "I'll be filing my report." "So will I." On Friday afternoon, I drove into Hamilton to pick up feed supplements. As I loaded bags into my truck, Sam Holloway pulled alongside in his dusty Ford. "He been coming around?" "3 visits." Sam sighed. "That's how it starts." "You recognize the routine?" "I lived it." He looked toward the highway before lowering his voice. "Ethan never actually finds violations. So why keep showing up?" "Because after enough patrol cars visit your ranch," he paused, "people start believing there must be something wrong." That sentence followed me all the way home. Harassment isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reputation. Create enough official-looking attention, and eventually neighbors stop asking whether you're guilty. They start assuming you are. That evening, I added another section to the Brooks folder. Deputy contacts. 3 entries already filled the page. Every visit, every photograph, every statement. Patterns matter, especially when someone doesn't realize they're creating one. As I closed the folder, headlights appeared again at the end of my driveway. The same patrol SUV slowed beside my gate before continuing down the county road without stopping. No inspection, no conversation, just a slow pass. A reminder that someone wanted me to know they were watching. I watched the taillights disappear beyond the trees. One question kept echoing in my mind. Was Deputy Ethan Brooks protecting the county? Or protecting whatever his sister wanted hidden behind my locked gate? I stopped guessing the following Monday. If there was a pattern, it wouldn't be hiding on my ranch. It would be hiding in county records. The Ravalli County Administration Building wasn't much to look at, but government offices rarely are. I found Martha Cole in the Land Records Department exactly where the receptionist said she'd be, surrounded by shelves of plats, surveys, and property books that stretched back generations. She looked over the deed I'd brought. "Mercer Ranch," she said. "Original parcel, never subdivided." "I need to know something." She leaned back. "What exactly?" "I've got an HOA trying to regulate land outside its boundaries." Her expression changed. "Silver Creek Ridge? You've heard the name." "I've processed enough paperwork." That wasn't quite an answer. It didn't need to be. Martha logged into the county database and rotated the monitor toward me. "Let's start with adjoining parcels." Within minutes, a map covered the screen. My ranch sat against the northern edge of Silver Creek Ridge. To the west had once been the Peterson Ranch. Southwest, the Holloway parcel. East, land formerly owned by the Anders family. Every one of those ranches had eventually become residential lots. "What were the sale dates?" I asked. She opened another file. Peterson. Sold. 18 months after the HOA formed. Anders. Sold. 14 months after repeated county complaints. Miller Ranch. Sold. 16 months after multiple nuisance investigations. I felt something click. Can you pull complaint histories? They're public records. One after another, the files appeared. Livestock complaints, fence complaints, noise complaints, drainage complaints. Almost identical language, almost identical timing. Then came something even stranger. Each property had received several visits from the sheriff's office shortly before it changed hands. I looked at Martha. Do deputies normally inspect private ranches over HOA complaints? She shook her head. Not unless there's an actual criminal issue. There wasn't. I know. She paused before opening one final folder. You should probably see this. The document wasn't an inspection report. It was a planning proposal. Silver Creek Ridge Expansion Phase 4. Attached to it was a confidential development map submitted to the county nearly a year earlier. I immediately noticed one problem. The proposed resort entrance crossed directly through my ranch. Not beside it. Through it. Luxury cabins, private fishing access, equestrian trails, a boutique lodge overlooking the Bitterroot Valley. Everything depended on a single access corridor. My access road. Has this been approved? I asked. No. What stopped it? She tapped the screen. Property acquisition incomplete. I already knew what that meant. They couldn't build unless they owned or controlled my land. Suddenly, every violation letter made sense. The inspections, the deputy visits, the demand for my gate key. None of it had anything to do with community safety. They were trying to make life difficult enough that selling would seem easier than staying. Who owns the development company? I asked. Martha searched another file. Brooks Mountain Development. My stomach tightened. Officers? She read directly from the registration. Garrett Brooks. Relation? Husband of Vanessa Brooks. There it was. The piece nobody expected me to find. The HOA president wasn't just protecting homeowners. Her family stood to make millions if my ranch disappeared. Martha printed several public documents and quietly slid them across the desk. I'm probably going to regret helping you. Everything you printed is public record. I know. She looked me in the eye. Most people never think to ask for it. Back at the ranch, I spread the new documents across my kitchen table beside the growing Brooks folder. I built a timeline, HOA complaints, county inspections, sheriff visits, below-market purchase offers on neighboring ranches, residential development approvals. Every event fit together like gears inside the same machine. One missing piece remained. Proof that the harassment wasn't merely similar. Proof that it had been coordinated. As I was pinning another document onto the timeline, my phone rang. It was Sam Holloway. His voice sounded unusually tight. Jack, what happened? I just saw 2 trucks parked outside your south fence. County? No. Who? He hesitated. Brooks Mountain Development. I looked out the kitchen window toward the distant pasture. Dust was already rising beyond the tree line. For the first time since I'd returned to Montana, they weren't sending letters anymore. They were starting to measure what they thought would soon belong to them. By the time I reached the south pasture, the 2 white Brooks Mountain Development trucks were already pulling away. I didn't chase them. Instead, I walked the fence line. Fresh orange survey flags stood every 50 yards, running straight across my grazing pasture toward the creek. None of them belonged there. I crouched beside the nearest one. No county markings, no license survey stamp, just a strip of fluorescent tape tied to a steel rod driven into my land. I photographed every flag before pulling each one out. 23 in total. I stacked them in the bed of my pickup. Someone wanted me to see them. Someone wanted me to believe the decision had already been made. They were wrong. The next morning proved they were becoming impatient. I walked outside just after sunrise and immediately noticed something was wrong. The north pasture looked empty. My cattle should have been clustered near the water trough. Instead, only half the herd remained. My stomach tightened. I climbed into the truck and followed the fence. About 300 yards from the county road, I found the break. The woven wire had been cut cleanly in 2 places. Not broken, not weathered. Cut. Heavy bolt cutters. The opening was wide enough for cattle to wander straight onto the road. I called Sam before dialing anyone else. He arrived 10 minutes later. One look at the fence and he slowly shook his head. They've done this before. We spent the next 4 hours gathering scattered cattle from neighboring fields. Most came back without trouble. One didn't. The young black calf lay beside the shoulder nearly a mile away. The driver who'd struck it was already waiting with a highway patrol officer. He looked sick. I never had a chance, he said quietly. I know. The patrol officer examined the damaged fence after I showed him the location. No storm? No. Any fallen trees? Nothing. He looked toward the clean cuts. I'll include that in my report. He never called it sabotage. He didn't have enough evidence. Neither did I. Not yet. By afternoon, another surprise arrived. Animal control. A woman stepped out carrying another clipboard. We've received a complaint that your livestock created a public traffic hazard. I almost laughed. Someone reported the cattle? About 30 minutes after the accident. I handed her a copy of the patrol officer's preliminary report showing the damaged fence. She read it carefully. This changes things. It should. She closed her folder. I'll note that your fence appears to have been intentionally damaged before the animals escaped. That single sentence mattered. Not because it proved anything, because it officially documented someone else's observation besides mine. Evidence grows one witness at a time. That evening, Sam returned, carrying an old metal coffee tin. Inside were faded photographs, letters, newspaper clippings. He spread them across my kitchen table beside the Brooks folder. Peterson Ranch, he said, pointing to one picture. The family stood smiling beside a weathered barn. A newspaper clipping showed luxury homes built on the same ground 3 years later. Next came the Anders family, then the Millers. Each story looked painfully familiar. HOA complaints, county visits, financial pressure, sale, development. They all thought they were fighting separate battles, Sam said quietly. They weren't. No. They were fighting the same people. He nodded, and losing one at a time. I stared at the growing timeline pinned across my dining room wall. Survey flags, fence cuts, inspection reports, development maps. Every piece pointed in the same direction. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was an organized campaign. The only question left was whether I could prove coordination instead of coincidence. As Sam reached the front door, he stopped. I almost forgot. He handed me a folded business card. Found this near your broken fence. It belonged to Brooks Mountain Development. On the back, someone had scribbled 3 words in black marker. South access confirmed. I looked from the card to the map hanging on my wall. The note wasn't talking about the broken fence. It was talking about my ranch. Someone already believed they had a way in. They just hadn't realized they were leaving a trail behind them. The business card from Brooks Mountain Development sat on my desk beside the growing Brooks folder. I didn't celebrate finding it. Evidence only matters when you can connect it to intent. So instead of calling the sheriff, I called someone who understood exactly how federal investigations were built. Daniel Ruiz answered on the second ring. Jack Mercer, he said, either you're inviting me fishing or something's gone very wrong. I wish it were fishing. I spent 15 minutes walking him through everything. The HOA letters, the inspections, the deputy visits, the development proposal, the cut fence, the survey flags, the handwritten note. When I finished, there was a long pause. Finally, Daniel asked one question. Have you reacted to any of it? No. Good. I've documented everything. I expected you had. He sighed. This isn't a property dispute anymore. I know. It sounds coordinated. That's exactly what I'm trying to prove. Daniel's voice became more deliberate. Don't confront them. Don't accuse anyone. Build the timeline first. Patterns win cases. They always did. I'll come take a look this week. After we hung up, I made one more call. Rebecca Sloan had spent nearly 20 years handling Montana property rights cases. She met me the following afternoon at the ranch with a legal pad already half full of notes. She spent nearly 3 hours reading every document in the Brooks folder without interrupting. Finally, she closed the last binder. They're not trying to beat you in court. I figured. They're trying to make court look so expensive that you sell before anyone ever files. She circled 3 dates on my timeline. These inspection requests all came within 48 hours of HOA complaints. Then she circled 3 more. And every deputy visit happened right before another violation letter. I leaned forward. You see it too. I see coordination. Can we prove it? Not yet. She smiled slightly. But they're getting careless. Before leaving, Rebecca gave me one instruction. From today forward, document every conversation exactly as it happens. I already have. I know. She looked toward my front gate. I mean everything. The opportunity came sooner than either of us expected. 3 days later, I was driving back from Hamilton with feed supplies when red and blue lights flashed behind my truck. I pulled onto the shoulder. Deputy Ethan Brooks took his time walking toward my window. Afternoon. What seems to be the problem? Your brake light. I checked them before I left. I'm checking them now. He walked around my truck once, then twice. He never touched the lights. Instead, he spent nearly 5 minutes studying my trailer, fuel cans, and livestock tags. When he returned, he leaned against my open window. You've been busy. So have you. He ignored the remark. You know, people who cooperate usually stop getting inspected. People with legal authority don't usually negotiate compliance. His jaw tightened. You think you know the law? I know enough to ask questions. He handed back my license. No citation today. I didn't expect one. As I pulled away, I glanced at the dashboard clock. The entire stop had lasted 18 minutes. Long enough to inconvenience me. Not long enough to justify itself. When I reached home, I copied the dash camera footage onto 2 separate hard drives. Date, time, duration, statements made. Everything joined the growing timeline. The next morning, Ethan was back. This time, he parked outside my ranch gate without getting out. 20 minutes, engine running, watching. When he finally drove away, I walked to the gate and found fresh tire tracks beside the fence where someone had pulled completely off the county road. I photographed them before returning to the house. That afternoon, Daniel Ruiz arrived in an unmarked pickup. He reviewed every binder, every photograph, every report. When he finished, he stood quietly in front of the timeline covering my dining room wall. You've got enough here to show the pattern, but not intent. Correct. What are we missing? Daniel pointed to one empty section. We need one mistake. From who? He looked toward the ranch gate. From the deputy. At almost the exact moment he spoke, my security camera chimed. A patrol SUV had just turned into my driveway. Ethan Brooks was back again. Only this time, he wasn't stopping at the gate. He was walking straight toward my front door. Daniel looked at the security monitor mounted above my desk. Perfect timing, he said quietly. I assume you don't want him seeing you. He was already moving toward the back hallway. The less he knows today, the better. By the time I opened the front door, Daniel was out of sight. Deputy Ethan Brooks stood on my porch in full uniform. Pressed shirt, duty belt, body camera. The confidence he'd carried during every previous visit was still there. Only this time he skipped the small talk. We need to discuss your refusal to cooperate. I'm listening. He handed me a single sheet of paper. Across the top in bold letters were the words, Notice of Emergency Access Review. It looked official, county letterhead, typed signature block, legal language. I'd read enough government documents in my career to recognize one immediately. This wasn't one. I scanned the page. No case number, no court order, no statutory citation, no judge, no administrative hearing, nothing granting him any legal authority whatsoever. You expect me to surrender my gate key because of this? It's an official county notice. It isn't. His expression hardened. I suggest you reconsider. I suggest you tell me what law you're enforcing. He ignored the question. If emergency responders can't access your property, you'll be responsible. My ranch has been here for nearly 40 years without HOA supervision. This isn't about the HOA. No? No. I held up the paper. Then why does this mention Silver Creek Ridge's emergency coordination plan? For the first time, he hesitated. Barely. But long enough. You've been asking a lot of questions. I spent my career asking the right ones. His patience finally cracked. Listen carefully. He stepped closer. If you don't voluntarily provide access, I can recommend additional inspections. I've already passed every inspection. That can change. My fences haven't. His voice dropped. I can make your life very expensive. There it was. Not a threat of violence, a threat of process. Paperwork, inspections, delay, pressure. Exactly the strategy Rebecca had predicted. I looked directly at him. Do you realize what you're saying? I realize people eventually cooperate. Again. The same sentence, the same script Vanessa had used, the same language from the violation letters, the same pressure, different messenger. I reached into my jacket pocket. Ethan's eyes immediately followed my hand. He probably expected a set of ranch keys. Instead, I removed an old brown leather credential wallet. The edges were worn smooth from decades of use. I slowly unfolded it. Inside sat my retired FBI badge. Beside it was my identification card. Special Agent Jack Mercer, Federal Bureau of Investigation, retired. I never shoved it toward him, never flashed it dramatically. I simply held it where he couldn't avoid seeing it. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. His eyes moved from the badge to my face, then back again. Every ounce of confidence drained from him. I retired last year. You were FBI? For 26 years. He swallowed. Public corruption investigations, county officials, abuse of authority, developers, dirty contracts. Everything about his posture changed. He took one slow step backward. I closed the credential wallet and slipped it back into my pocket. You should have asked who owned this ranch before deciding who you could bully. He didn't answer. For the first time since we'd met, he genuinely looked uncertain. Not because of the badge itself, because of what it meant. He suddenly understood that every conversation, every inspection, every unofficial notice, every stop along the highway, had been witnessed by someone who knew exactly how abuse of authority was documented. He glanced toward the driveway. You've been recording this. I record important conversations. His eyes briefly searched the porch, the corners of the roof, the gate, the barn. Too late. Now he was looking for cameras, which meant he finally understood there might actually be evidence. Without another word, he folded the notice, shoved it under one arm, and turned toward his patrol SUV. His pace was noticeably faster than when he'd arrived. I watched him disappear down the gravel road. Only after the dust settled did Daniel step back into the living room. Interesting. He wasn't expecting the badge. No. Daniel looked toward the empty driveway. But that's not what shook him. What did? He realized something much worse. I raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled faintly. He just spent 3 weeks creating evidence for someone who knows exactly how federal cases are built. Before I could answer, Rebecca Sloan called. I've got news, she said. They just made another mistake. What happened? I intercepted a filing request this afternoon. For what? She didn't hesitate. Brooks Mountain Development has scheduled a formal access agreement meeting. I never agreed to one. I know. Her voice became very calm. They think you're finally ready to hand over the gate. I looked toward the locked entrance at the end of my driveway. For the first time since this began, they weren't trying to intimidate me anymore. They thought they had already won. Rebecca Sloan arrived at the ranch the following morning, carrying a slim leather briefcase instead of her usual stack of files. She laid a single document on my kitchen table. Read the first paragraph. I did. Proposed private access agreement prepared by Brooks Mountain Development. It stated that I had voluntarily agreed to discuss granting permanent access across my ranch for future community infrastructure. I looked up. I never agreed to anything. Rebecca nodded. I know. So why draft the agreement? Because someone expects signatures this weekend. Daniel Ruiz leaned against the doorway. And expectations make people careless. Rebecca opened another folder. I've spent the last 48 hours tracing Brooks Mountain Development. She slid several financial records across the table. Garrett Brooks wasn't just building another subdivision. 3 private investment firms had already committed funding for a luxury mountain resort overlooking the Bitterroot Valley. Construction financing depended on one condition: guaranteed legal access through my ranch. If they don't secure your road, Rebecca said, the investors can walk away. So this entire campaign has been about one road. Daniel tapped the development map, which explains why Vanessa wanted your gate key before anyone even discussed buying your land. They didn't need ownership first. They needed control. Control could become leverage. Leverage could become pressure. Pressure could become a sale. It was cleaner than trespassing. Harder to prove. Until now. Rebecca closed her folder. They've invited themselves to your ranch Saturday morning. I assume Vanessa and Ethan. Daniel smiled slightly. They think they're collecting keys. What are we collecting? The final piece. For the rest of the week, I did exactly what I'd been doing since the first violation letter. Nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. I repaired fences, fed cattle, sold honey at the farmer's market. If anyone from the HOA happened to see me, they'd find exactly what they expected. An aging rancher quietly accepting reality. Vanessa made sure of that. She approached my booth just before noon on Friday. Perfect hair, designer sunglasses, that same practiced smile. I heard you've been thinking things over. I have. I'm glad. She picked up a jar of honey. Sometimes fighting only delays the inevitable. I've learned timing matters. So have I. She lowered her voice. Saturday will be good for everyone. I nodded once. 9 o'clock, her smile widened. I knew you'd make the sensible decision. She walked away believing she'd just witnessed surrender. I watched her disappear into the crowd before quietly taking out my phone. The entire conversation had been recorded. Friday evening, 3 vehicles rolled onto my ranch after dark. No lights, no marked government logos. Daniel stepped out first. Behind him came 2 FBI agents in plain clothes. Inside the barn, we spread every piece of evidence across a folding table. Violation notices, inspection reports, dash camera footage, security videos, development maps, financial records, survey photographs, the handwritten Brooks Mountain card. Rebecca placed colored tabs across each section. Every document supports another. Daniel nodded. Which means no single piece has to carry the entire case. One of the younger agents looked toward me. So tomorrow? Daniel answered before I could. Tomorrow nobody argues. No confrontation? None. No speeches? Daniel smiled. We're investigators. He pointed toward the evidence. The documents will do the talking. Just before midnight, Rebecca received one final email. She opened it and quietly turned the screen toward us. It was from Brooks Mountain Development. Thank you for agreeing to execute the access documents. Representatives will arrive Saturday at 9 a.m. I hadn't agreed to anything. The assumption itself had become evidence. Rebecca saved the email. Wire transmission. Daniel nodded. Keep it. At sunrise, I walked to the front gate carrying exactly what Vanessa expected. A ring of ranch keys. I clipped them to my belt where they were impossible to miss. Then I unlocked the chain. Not the gate. Just enough that I could open it myself when the time came. Daniel noticed. You nervous? No. You should be. I've stood in courtrooms full of corrupt officials before. He smiled. And today? Today they're coming to me. By 8:30, every camera on the ranch was recording. The porch camera, the gate camera, the barn camera, the driveway camera, every angle synchronized to the same clock. Rebecca checked her watch. Federal team is in position. Daniel adjusted an earpiece. They're waiting beyond the ridge. At exactly 8:58, I heard an engine climbing the gravel road. Then another. Pearl white paint appeared through the pine trees. Vanessa Brooks arrived precisely on time. A sheriff's patrol SUV followed only a few yards behind her. She stepped out smiling before the vehicles had fully stopped. Deputy Ethan Brooks opened his driver's door and walked toward the gate with one hand already extended. He wasn't reaching for my ranch. He was reaching for my keys. Neither of them noticed the faint cloud of dust beginning to rise over the next hill. Vanessa stopped beside her SUV with that same polished smile she'd worn the day she first demanded access to my ranch. I knew you'd make the practical choice, Jack. I rested one hand on the ring of keys clipped to my belt. Did you? People always do. Deputy Ethan Brooks extended his hand. I'll take those. His tone carried none of the hostility from our previous encounters. In his mind, the hard part was already over. I looked at his open palm. You seem awfully confident. We're here to finalize the access agreement. I haven't signed anything. Vanessa laughed softly. That's what this morning is for. Rebecca Sloan stepped onto the porch behind me carrying a thin folder. Vanessa's smile flickered. I didn't realize your attorney would be joining us. I never go into legal meetings alone, I said. Ethan frowned. This isn't a legal meeting, Rebecca answered before I could. Then why did your company draft a legal access agreement? Neither of them responded. The dust cloud behind them grew larger. Vanessa never looked back. She was too focused on the keys. I think we're wasting time, she said. Once Deputy Brooks has access, the rest is paperwork. No, I replied. The paperwork came first. A low rumble echoed across the valley. 3 black SUVs crested the hill almost simultaneously. They weren't speeding. They didn't need to. They rolled down the gravel road with the calm confidence of people who already knew exactly where they were going. Vanessa finally turned. So, who are they? The lead Suburban stopped beside the patrol vehicle. Its doors opened. Daniel Ruiz stepped out first. Behind him came 4 FBI agents wearing windbreakers marked with bright gold lettering. A second SUV unloaded 2 investigators from the Montana Department of Justice. The third carried county officials from the Public Integrity Unit. The entire mood shifted in an instant. Ethan instinctively took one step backward. Daniel spoke first. Deputy Ethan Brooks, his voice was calm. Please keep your hands where we can see them. Ethan looked confused. What is this? A federal investigation, Vanessa forced a laugh. There has to be some misunderstanding. Rebecca quietly handed Daniel the final email Brooks Mountain Development had sent the night before. He added it to the binder already in his hands. No misunderstanding. Daniel turned another page. We have documented HOA complaints filed outside your jurisdiction. Another page. Repeated county inspections initiated without supporting violations. Another. Development plans relying upon property your company does not own. Another. traffic stops, and official contacts establishing a pattern of intimidation. Each page landed like another stone. Vanessa's smile disappeared completely. She looked at Ethan. "Say something." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A county investigator stepped forward. "We also reviewed every complaint submitted against Mr. Mercer." He held up a printed spreadsheet. "So, 43 complaints." He looked directly at Vanessa. 41 originated from the same IP address associated with HOA administrative offices. Her face went pale. Daniel continued. "Brooks Mountain Development also transmitted legal access documents before obtaining consent from the property owner." He held up the email. "Federal wire records preserved that communication." Rebecca opened the final section of the binder. Across the top sat a simple timeline. Violation notices, inspection requests, deputy visits, survey flags, fence damage, development filings, investment agreements. Every document supported the next. No single piece stood alone. Together they told one story. Ethan slowly lowered his hand away from his duty belt. "I didn't break any law." Daniel looked him in the eye. "That determination isn't yours to make." An FBI agent stepped beside him. "Deputy Brooks, you're being detained pending questioning regarding abuse of official authority and related investigative matters." The handcuffs clicked shut. The sound echoed across the quiet pasture. Vanessa stared in disbelief. "You can't do this." Daniel looked toward the ranch gate. "We didn't," he nodded toward me. "You did." More vehicles began arriving. Word had spread quickly. Several neighboring ranchers parked along the county road. Sam Holloway climbed out of his truck and quietly removed his hat. For years, he'd watched families disappear one by one. Now he watched the pattern stop. Vanessa's shoulders finally sagged. She looked at me. "You planned this." I shook my head. "No." I looked down at the binder resting on Rebecca's arm. "You planned it. I just kept the records." The ranch keys were still hanging untouched from my belt. No one reached for them again. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Once Daniel Ruiz's team secured the documents from Brooks Mountain Development, the story practically assembled itself. Every violation letter matched an inspection request. Every inspection lined up with one of Ethan Brooks's visits. Every visit was followed by another attempt to pressure neighboring ranchers into selling. The timeline we'd built inside my kitchen had become the government's timeline. Within 48 hours, federal agents executed search warrants at Brooks Mountain Development's offices and the Silver Creek Ridge HOA headquarters. Computers, financial records, email servers, meeting minutes. They collected everything. Rebecca called me that evening. They found internal emails. What kind? The kind people write when they think nobody else will ever read them. One message from Garrett Brooks referred to my ranch as the final corridor. Another instructed employees to increase administrative pressure until Mercer becomes realistic. There were spreadsheets listing neighboring ranches by owner, estimated property value, complaint history, and something labeled acquisition probability. Families had been reduced to percentages. The evidence no longer showed isolated misconduct. It showed a business model. 3 months later, I testified before a federal grand jury. I wasn't there to tell a dramatic story. I simply walked them through the documents. Dates, photographs, recorded conversations, inspection reports. The same method I'd used for 26 years. Facts speak louder than outrage. When the indictments were unsealed, they reflected exactly that. Deputy Ethan Brooks was charged with abusing official authority, making false official statements during an investigation, and participating in a conspiracy to interfere with lawful property rights. He eventually accepted responsibility rather than force a trial. His law enforcement career ended the day he surrendered his badge. Garrett Brooks faced wire fraud and conspiracy charges connected to the development scheme and the fraudulent access campaign. Investors immediately withdrew from the resort project once the evidence became public. Without the illegal access corridor, the entire development collapsed. Vanessa Brooks never faced criminal conviction. Rebecca had warned me that would likely happen. She was careful, she'd said. She gave instructions. Other people carried them out. But civil court operates under different rules. Former ranch owners came forward one after another. The Peterson family, the Anders family, relatives of the Miller Ranch. Even families who had already moved away returned to testify about years of coordinated pressure. What none of them possessed individually became overwhelming together. The civil judgments forced Vanessa to resign permanently from every HOA position she held. Silver Creek Ridge elected an entirely new board. Their first official vote voided every disputed violation issued during Vanessa's presidency. Their second was even more surprising. They mailed formal apologies to every affected property owner. A month later, I received one myself. I filed it beside the Brooks folder. Not because I needed it, because complete files deserve complete endings. Rebecca eventually convinced me to do something I'd never planned. We established the Bitterroot Land Defense Fund. Nothing complicated. Just a nonprofit connecting ranchers with attorneys willing to challenge unlawful HOA overreach and property rights abuse. Sam Holloway became the first volunteer. Martha Cole agreed to teach landowners how to research county records before signing anything. What started at my kitchen table slowly spread across western Montana. One Saturday afternoon, nearly a year after Vanessa first drove onto my ranch, Sam helped me replace the last section of fence damaged during the investigation. When we finished, he leaned against the gate and smiled. "You know what I like best?" "What's that?" "They're building fences again." I looked across the neighboring valley. Not subdivision fences, ranch fences. Families repairing property they no longer feared losing. For the first time since I'd returned to Montana, the silence sounded honest again. That evening, I walked down to the creek where Laura and I used to sit during summer visits years before she passed away. The current moved steadily over smooth stones, exactly as it always had. I took the ring of ranch keys from my pocket. The same keys Vanessa believed she would own. The same keys Ethan tried to intimidate me into surrendering. I locked the front gate before turning back toward the house. Not because I was hiding from anyone, because boundaries only matter when someone is willing to defend them lawfully. As the sun disappeared behind the Bitterroot Mountains, I realized something I hadn't understood when I first came home. I thought I had returned to Montana to escape investigations. Instead, the ranch reminded me why I became an investigator in the first place. Not to win arguments, not to punish people, but to make sure the truth had somewhere solid to stand. Some people believe a locked gate keeps neighbors out. They misunderstand what it protects. A locked gate simply tells the world that ownership still means something. And on that ranch, as long as those keys stayed in my pocket, the law and the land would remain exactly where they belonged.
If there's one lesson I carry away from all of this, it's that patience backed by truth is stronger than pressure backed by power. Jack never won because he shouted louder or fought harder. He won because he stayed calm, kept every document, asked the right questions, and trusted the law to do what its word desired to do. That's not just a lesson about land, it's a lesson about life. When someone tries to push you into making a decision through fear or exhaustion, slowing down and keeping good records can protect far more than your property. It can protect your peace of mind. Stories like this remind us that dignity isn't measured by how loudly we respond. Sometimes it's measured by how firmly we stand, how honest we act, and how faithfully we protect the things that matter to our families and the generations that come after us. I'd love to hear what you think. If you believe Trick handled this the right way, type yes in the comments. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or someone who thought they could pressure you into giving up what rightfully yours, share your story below. I read as many comments as I can, and your experience often inspire future story. If you enjoy story about quiet courage, common sense, and people standing their ground through the law instead of anger, I'd be honored if you subscribe and join us for the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and thanks for spending your time here with me.